It was the phone call that destroyed everything I believed I knew. Detective Laura Reynolds looked at her phone, her heart racing like a jackhammer against her chest. The voice at the other end was tense, close to shaking, with a blend of fear and urgency. A high-profile businessman? Murder accused. Laura, there's no one else who can testify. You have to come right away. Her mind went blank. Her fingers gripped the phone tighter as the reality sank in. Murder. A high-level businessman. And her, of all people, is now the primary witness. She had walked along hundreds of crime scenes, analyzed hundreds of clues, and questioned hundreds of suspects. But never had she thought that the dividing line between detective and witness would be so strongly blurred. Laura sat down, gasping for breath. She attempted to relive the events in her head, to look for some hint which might clarify why she had been put into this impossible situation. It had begun months earlier, when she had been quietly looking into a chain of financial discrepancies involving Daniel Whitman, one of the city's most powerful businessmen. At first glance, he was ideal, charming, well-connected, apparently unassailable. Yet there was always something about him that felt wrong. And now, with the accusation of murder looming over him, the whole investigation had descended into chaos. Her office was claustrophobic. The hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed more raucous than normal, like a nagging reminder that time was ticking away. Laura had always thought that she could keep emotions separate from facts. But now, emotions clung to every shred of evidence, strangling logic and reason. The courtroom itself was already in turmoil by the time Laura arrived. Cameras flashed incessantly, reporters whispered conspiratorially, and spectators murmured, straining to catch a glimpse of the accused. The air smelled of tension, sweat and stale coffee, a scent that instantly triggered Laura's instincts. She knew that in moments like these, every eye in the room could conceal a hidden motive. As she walked closer toward the witness stand, the magnitude of it all struck her like a blow. This was no longer about cracking a murder case. It was about staying alive, about truth, about justice. Each step she took was equivalent to entering a storm that she had no control over. The gleaming wooden floors creaked beneath her feet, every step sounding abnormally loud in the silent and charged atmosphere. Her hands were greasy with sweat, yet she couldn't help but keep on going. Laura's gaze swept the courtroom. Daniel Whitman sat at the defendant's table, his back straight, radiating calm confidence that made her unease. Beside and around him were his lawyers, scurrying papers, murmuring low voices, their faces unreadable. In the gallery, reporters slouched over notepads, typing hard, and cameras zoomed in on every flicker of movement. The air was charged, thick with anticipation, suspicion, and dread. But it was not only the drama of the courtroom that disturbed her. Laura sensed, in her very belly, that something was amiss. She had sensed it right from the moment when the first mysterious note was slipped on her desk at the police station. Speak carefully, or else. The sentences were plain, written on a blank sheet of paper with no name, but the menace in them was clear. They had known that she would receive it. They had known that she would believe it. And now, as she stood to give her testimony, the message hung over her mind like a black cloud: speak and risk something. Keep quiet, and the truth would be buried with her. Her mind ran wild. Could it possibly be linked to Daniel Whitman's case? Or was it another person, someone with a far more sinister motive? She had no idea. All she did know was that she could ill afford the luxury of fear. Not today. Not with the truth hanging precariously on the tip of a knife. Laura looked down at the folder that was closed in her fist. Within were the papers she had gathered over months. Photographs, taped testimony, witness affidavits, bits of circumstantial evidence. Each accounted for something. Each was a possible tool. But weapons in court were not the kind seen on the battlefield. Words, looks, implications. A single statement could be spun. A single move questioned. She hesitated in front of the witness stand, inhaling deeply. Her thoughts wandered back to the evening of the killing. The rain-soaked, dark streets. The yellow crime scene tape flapping like sinister pennants on windy streets. The revolving lights on police cars reflecting off rainy pavement. She recalled the body, the evidence strewn about like a puzzle pieced together to confuse. And she recalled Daniel Whitman, the untouchable man, striding from the scene with an air of equanimity that only served to enrage her. The trial was not only a court fight, it was a war of the mind, and Laura was marching right into the midst of it. She knew that once she stepped onto the witness stand, there would be no way out. Whatever she said would be picked apart, critiqued, and possibly used against her. Or worse, against the truth. Her gaze darted to the judge as he walked into the courtroom, a man of power and examination. The gavel came down, calling for silence, and the room was quiet. Laura felt the level of tension in the air, heavy enough to gag on. She swallowed, making an effort to stay calm. She could not allow fear to control her testimony. Not today. Not when the truth was more important than anything. With quivering hands, she straightened her body, took a deep breath, and took a step forward. Every step was heavier than the one before, as though the weight of the entire case rested on her shoulders. And yet, amidst all of the turmoil, one thing was certain. Laura Reynolds was prepared. Prepared to deal with whatever was next. Prepared to battle the shadows that lurked in every nook and cranny of the courtroom. And prepared to see that the truth, no matter how perilous or inconvenient, would at last have its day. But as she approached the stand, her heart still racing with one haunting question: who had written the notes, and how far would they go to keep their secret? She didn't know yet, but she was soon to know. And whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was charged with excitement as the trial officially started. Each whisper, each rustle of papers, each snap of a camera shutter sounded louder than it would have been. Detective Laura Reynolds sat down, her hands slightly shaking, holding the folder that held months of hard-won evidence. She could sense every eye in the place on her, not just the audience, but the defendant, the attorneys, and even the judge. Daniel Whitman sat at the defendant's table with an unnerving placidity. His seat was straight, his face serene, almost untroubled. But Laura understood that composure and charm were the ultimate camouflage for a lie. She couldn't risk being deceived. Not today. The judge adjourned the trial to order, and the courtroom was silent. The prosecutor started to paint the picture, a gradual and painstaking building of evidence that pointed to motive, opportunity, and suspicious past. Laura listened carefully, her gaze traveling around the court, searching for reactions, for concealed tells, for any sign that would support or contradict the story being told. Then arrived the defense lawyer. His plan was clear: raise doubt. Each of his questions seemed calculated to catch her off guard, to cause her to doubt what she had observed, what she had heard, and what she had gathered in months of investigation. Laura felt the tension mounting like a storm cloud about to burst. She knew that one miscalculation would reverse the momentum in Daniel's favor. And then, unexpectedly, it occurred. The first bomb of the trial was dropped like thunder. The defense presented a new, hitherto unreleased audio tape. It was purportedly a phone call between Daniel and another person, but it flatly contradicted every shred of evidence Laura had painstakingly collected. Her gut rolled over. Gasps filled the courtroom as onlookers and media understood that the trial was unexpectedly more intricate, more surprising. Laura's brain ran into overdrive. Who had sent the recording? Could it have been tampered with? Or worse, had it been planted to manipulate the trial? Every instinct screamed that something was amiss. She felt a cold sweat run down her back, as she realized that the ticking clock wasn't just a metaphor. With each tick of the clock, the trial moved closer to a verdict, and the wrong word or misstep could doom an innocent man, or bury the truth altogether. Her attorney nodded reassuringly, but Laura hardly registered it. She was fixated on the proof, the contradictions, and the covert signals in the courtroom. The witness stand was a battlefield of psychological warfare. Each stare by Daniel, each scribble handed under the table, each murmuring from the crowd was a potential ammunition. Time stretched and compressed, all at once. Moments crept by with glacial speed, then seemed to rush forward unpredictably. Laura felt her pulse in her throat as she waited for her own testimony. She memorized the facts repeatedly in her head, attempting to foresee every potential hurdle. The pressure was crushing, but she knew that her determination must not waver. In the corridors of justice outside, The press speculated wildly. There were rumors of corporate espionage, secret affairs, and old vendettas. But Laura knew better. The case was much more intimate, much more sinister than any speculation in the public arena implied. Someone had masterminded the events to frame Daniel, or anyone else for that matter, and Laura was caught in the middle of their plan. And then there was the quiet, nearly invisible warning that chilled her blood. A person who was sitting in the rear of the courtroom made a slight movement, a nod, a look that was familiar. Too familiar. A person she knew had infiltrated the proceeding, and their silent alert informed her precisely what she dreaded. The threat lay closer to home than she had suspected. Laura knew that time counted. The trial was not about evidence or arguments in law. It was about timing, perception, and staying alive. A single misheard word, a single ill-considered movement, could make the difference. The clock ticking down to the verdict was also ticking down to a revelation, a point when things concealed by shadow would be brought into the light. She glanced surreptitiously at Daniel once more. His even temper unnerved her, but it was also a facade. Laura recognized that he was a man who knew about power and control, a man who would stop at nothing to safeguard himself, and that only made her sure of her actions. She would testify, yes, but only on her terms, carefully, strategically, divulging only the truth that would hold up under fire and avoiding traps set by hidden hands. As the prosecutor began to call the first witness, Laura felt the walls closing around her. Every sentence spoken by the witnesses set a scene that rang of familiarity, and yet seemed incomplete. The discrepancies were small, the gaps in reason virtually indiscernible, yet Laura noticed them all. She could feel the burden of responsibility falling on her shoulders. She was no longer just watching the trial. She was a player, a leading player whose moves could change everything beyond recall. Hours passed. Laura's head reeled with each new piece of information, each buried motive uncovered through testimony. The tension was nearly intolerable. She understood that the trial would extract more from her than she had ever delivered before. Not only her insights but her courage, intelligence and skill at unraveling a maze of deceit. And sitting there waiting her turn to testify, Laura realized something essential. The trial was not just a quest for justice. It was a game of chess. And it was high stakes. Time was running out. Each move counted. And one misstep could ruin everything. But she also knew that one thing for sure. She couldn't let fear conquer. With a long calming breath, Laura braced herself for the tempest brewing to strike. The instant when her truth would be tested to its greatest strength. The courtroom had become a maze of whispers, nods and half-truths. Detective Laura Reynolds observed every move with keen attention, every flicker of exchange between lawyers, defendant and witnesses. Every detail counted, because in a case such as this, the shadows tended to conceal the most sinister secrets. The pressure mounted when the prosecutor brought a surprise witness onto the witness stand. A woman Laura had once trusted absolutely. For months she had depended on their wisdom, their integrity, and their advice throughout the investigation. She never could have conceived that this same individual would prove to be a threat. As the witness started talking, Laura felt a shiver run up her back. The things said weren't merely surprising. They were crushing. Facts that she had taken to be true were manipulated, misrepresented, and reconstructed. Furtive alliances, clandestine meetings, and covert betrayals emerged before her very eyes. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The defense smiled faintly, recognizing the turmoil their tactic had unleashed. Laura's brain reeled. Why would this individual betray her? She recapped each conversation, each document they shared, each assurance of coordination. Something wasn't right. This had nothing to do with the case. It was personal. Someone had taken months to manipulate the investigation, crafting the evidence to orchestrate the outcome of the trial. Her gaze flashed to Daniel Whitman. He was standing there eerily calm, but Laura detected the faintest glimmer of a smile in his eyes. He had known all along more than anyone had suspected. And now, thanks to the secret witness, the courtroom was slowly unraveling, not around him, but around her testimony. The single shred of truth that could swing the scales toward justice. As she went on, Laura understood the magnitude of the fraud. Someone had manipulated this entire trial behind the scenes. strategically dropping evidence, sowing doubt, and manipulating individuals she'd trusted. The epiphany struck her as a physical punch. The danger wasn't the accused, the case, or even the courtroom. It was someone she never would have suspected. Someone who lay in plain sight. She held the witness stand, knuckles paling as she attempted to balance. If this secret is allowed to unravel unchecked, the truth will never reach daylight. Her brain ran back through every shred of evidence, attempting to uncover the cracks in the story, the inconsistencies she could exploit. The defense attorney's grin widened as if sensing her inner turmoil. Every second Laura hesitated was another victory for the lies. Then came the subtle but unmistakable signs of danger. A figure in the back of the courtroom, someone Laura had seen before in private settings, shifted slightly, signaling a warning. It was the same gesture she had seen during her investigations, the one that always meant trouble. Her pulse quickened. Whatever was behind this had not only infiltrated the courtroom, they were dictating it. Every witness, every shred of evidence, every word uttered had been controlled by their hand. Laura was aware that she had to tread cautiously. One misstep, one ill-advised word, and the case would be ruined, and potentially put her at risk. She began laying out her testimony in her head with precision, balancing every word, every approach, every subtle disclosure that might reveal the manipulation, without opening the door for the orchestrator to attack. Outside the courtroom, the media hype intensified. The headlines guessed wildly of ulterior motives, corporate greed, and illicit affairs. But Laura understood the truth was not in the rumor, it was in the shadows, in the minute shifts and unspoken words, in the manipulations no one could discern. Laura's mind went back to the evening of the murder. The darkness of that evening appeared to reach out into the courtroom, interweaving with the present. Each deception, each betrayal, each ulterior motive felt linked. The trial was no longer a pursuit of justice. It was a game of high stakes, with players invisible, the rules being set by secrecy, terror, and manipulation. As the surprise witness finished testifying, the courtroom burst into whispers. Gasps, whispers, and bewildered faces swept the air. Laura felt responsibility bearing down on her shoulders even more so now. She knew that the next few moments, her opportunity to testify, would be more crucial than she ever could have dreamed. Not only would she need to expose the truth, but she would need to expose it while wading through a minefield of lies, deception, and betrayal. The judge requested a short recess, and Laura descended from the witness stand, still with a racing heart. In the closed doors of the courtroom chambers, she muttered to herself, "This is not for Daniel alone. This is about uncovering the shadows, whoever is lurking in them, and I will not let them prevail." Even in the recess, Laura couldn't help but feel she was being watched. Every shadow, every twitch of movement, every whisper seemed to be laced with a secret meaning. She felt she understood the threat wasn't yet done. Far from it. A strong and astute individual was pulling the strings behind the scenes, and she had merely seen a fraction of what they planned. Laura breathed deeply and concentrated. She needed to be prepared. The remainder of the trial would require not only her courage, but also her smarts, her instincts, and her skills for dealing with a courtroom full of lies. She had endured crime scenes, investigations, and confrontations, but nothing had fully prepared her for this. As she went back to her seat, prepared to meet the next bout of the trial, one thing continued echoing in her mind. The shadows are silent. They watch, they wait, and they plot. And it's time I fight. The courtroom descended into a tense hush, as Detective Laura Reynolds stood at last to testify. All eyes in the room appeared to bore into her, weighing her every step, anticipating the slightest quiver, the tiniest hesitation. Cameras snapped round the clock, freezing every twitch of a facial muscle, while Daniel Whitman sat on the opposite side of the table, calm and collected, his hands resting together neatly, challenging her to stumble. Laura's hands were still shaking slightly, as she clung to the sides of the witness stand. Her evidence folder, which she had carried for months, now seemed to weigh heavier than ever, its weight crushing from the burden that it held. This wasn't merely a matter of providing facts. It was a battle for survival, justice, and revealing the underlying manipulations that had tainted the case. Her voice quivered at first, as she began to speak. "I've investigated this case from the beginning. Every piece of evidence, every conversation, every lead, it all points to a truth that has been deliberately obscured." She paused, scanning the courtroom, feeling the intensity of the atmosphere pressing against her like a physical force. The defense lawyer quickly interjected, attempting to rattle her with quick-fire questions. "Detective Reynolds, weren't you mistaken? Might there have been someone else controlling the evidence?" Laura's heart beat faster, but she composed herself. She had been expecting this barrage. "I've gone over it all several times," she replied firmly. "And I can assure that what I'm going to testify is the truth." Then arrived the moment that made the courtroom collectively draw breath. Laura started explaining the backstage manipulations, laying bare the contradictions in the evidence, and unveiling the sinister forces operating the trial. She recounted the cryptic messages, the manipulated recordings, and the surprise betrayal of someone she had trusted. Gasps spread throughout the courtroom. Onlookers bent forward, reporters wrote wildly, and Daniel's face grew slightly tighter, betraying the first faintest crack in his stoic mask. Laura's voice strengthened with every disclosure, fueled by the certainty that the truth was her sole ammunition against a system built to safeguard the guilty. Tears welled in Laura's eyes as she testified, but not out of fear. These were anger, frustration, and determination all tied together. She disclosed the emotional cost of the investigation, the late nights, the sleepless nights, the times of doubt when the lies did seem overwhelming. She explained to the jury that behind each fact and statistic lay a human tale, a tale of deception and bravery, and a tale that cried out for justice. Each word had been chosen with care. Laura revealed how evidence was fudged, how witnesses were coached, and how the story was distorted to cover up for someone in power. The courtroom leaned into her every word. Even the judge shifted forward, sensing the significance of what was being laid bare. And then the biggest shock. Laura explained how she had discovered the mastermind behind the deception, a person who had been hiding in plain view, pulling strings from behind the scenes. She spoke the name nervously, but the effect was immediate. Gasps and whispers moved like a wave through the room. Individuals who had appeared confident just moments before now appeared dazed. Daniel Whitman's calm frayed. For the first time, Laura noticed uncertainty flash in his eyes. She understood at that moment that the balance of power had changed. The courtroom was no longer in the command of the accused and the clandestine puppeteer. It was under the burden of her testimony. The defense lawyer attempted to cut in, to discredit her, but Laura's attorney intervened, objecting vociferously. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged, each side cognizant of the fact that the stakes had just been raised. Laura breathed deeply and went on, refusing to let anyone deflect her from her purpose. She detailed the sequence of events carefully, connecting one piece of evidence to the next, revealing a web of deceit that had endangered the truth of being forever lost. By the end, Laura's voice was firm, determined, and commanding. She had given everything she possessed to that testimony, her experience, her expertise, and her courage. She had withstood the manipulations, the intimidation, and the psychological traps laid by the mastermind of the deception, and she had emerged triumphant. The courtroom fell silent for a very long time, as if it was holding its breath, taking in the gravity of her words. Then there were murmurs, soft at first, but increasing in volume as the magnitude of her testimony was realized. Witnesses tattled, reporters clicked pens louder, and even the judge appeared to deliberate the consequences. Laura left the stand, her legs a bit shaky, but her head clear. She had testified truthfully. She had opened up the shadows, and she had demonstrated that even in the midst of betrayal, fear, and manipulation, there was still room for bravery to emerge. As she sat back in her seat, she was sure of one thing: the trial was far from finished. But the current had turned. The secret manipulator had been outed, the lies exposed, and the truth, after all this time, was starting to find its place under the light. For the first time in weeks, Laura permitted herself a fleeting moment of respite. The courtroom had been a war zone, but she had emerged alive. And with the next stage of the trial looming, she felt a new determination. Whoever had attempted to manipulate this case behind the scenes would now have to contend with her watchfulness, her resolve, and the irrepressible power of the truth. The courtroom was thick, barely endured. Hours of deliberation had gone by, and now the jurors re-entered, faces inscrutable. All eyes in the room were on the judge, who adjusted his robes and cleared his throat. The air was charged, heavy with expectation, as if the walls of the courtroom were collectively holding their breath. Detective Laura Reynolds sat at the edge of her seat, heart pounding like a drum. Weeks of preparation, months of investigation, countless sleepless nights, all had led to this singular moment. She knew that one word from the judge could change everything. One word could mean justice, or betrayal. He gazed down at his papers, then ahead. In the case of the state versus Daniel Whitman, his tone was level, even. But each syllable rang out like thunder in the stillness of the courtroom. We, the jury, have reached a verdict. A shiver of expectation swept across the room. Laura took a deep breath. Daniel's knuckles whiter than white, his hands clasped around the edge of the table, his face set only moments before, now registered the merest hint of fear. The judge went on. We find the defendant. Laura's body clenched, time stretched out in an unnatural way, each second an eternity. She could sense the pressure of the moment bearing down upon her like something solid. Not guilty. The words struck her like a shockwave. Relief, confusion, frustration, a mix of these swirled in her simultaneously. Daniel took a deep breath, a small smile creeping onto his face. The courtroom burst into whispers, murmurs, and flashes from camera bulbs. Onlookers stretched their necks, reporters taking frantic notes, and the masterful manipulator in the background, the one who had orchestrated so much dishonesty, granted themselves a quiet, smug smile. But the respite was brief. As individuals started to rise, collect their belongings, and leave the courtroom, a tiny envelope dropped from the witness box onto the floor. Laura saw it straight away. Something inside her compelled her not to leave it. She stooped to retrieve it, shaking hands. The envelope itself was unadorned, empty of initials, and thick with promise. Inside, there were documents, photos, and a USB stick. Her gut cramped. This wasn't merely evidence. It was a revelation. The person who had put the manipulation in motion had left a trace, a path that could now finally reveal the true perpetrator. Laura's heart was pounding as she comprehended the enormity of what was in her hands. The trial had concluded, yes, but the true story was just breaking. The master manipulator, the behind-the-scenes arranger of deception, was still on the loose, and this fresh evidence could make everything turn on its head. She looked over the courtroom. Photographers were clicking away, onlookers were hushed with excitement, and Daniel Whitman was walking out, victorious but unaware of what had just been revealed. Laura was aware that he might have gotten away with this sentence, but the truth had not been stifled. It had only been put on hold, waiting for the opportune moment to emerge. Laura stood up straight and took a deep breath. She felt determination rise in her, a renewed purpose. The shadows had not prevailed. The truth remained alive, still combatant, and she its protector, who had attempted to manipulate, intimidate, and dictate in the courtroom, would learn that justice could not be so easily manipulated. As she left the courtroom, envelope in hand, Laura had one thing on her mind for sure. This was just the beginning. The silent witness was no longer mute. The web of deceptions had been unraveled somewhat, but the actual mastermind behind it all had yet to see justice. The city outside the courthouse remained oblivious to what had just occurred within it, but Laura was aware. She had caught a glimpse of the depths of human deceit, the extremes to which people were willing to go to safeguard themselves, and the shadows that lurked in the open. And now, with the fresh evidence in her possession, she was set to expose them to the light. The tale was not complete. It had only hit the first turning point. Laura Reynolds entered the uncharted future with assurance, resolve, and an inner flame. The truth would never be silenced, and justice, however belated, would be meted out. Even as the doors of the courthouse slammed shut behind her, she could sense the eyes of the shadows upon her. But for the first time in weeks, she smiled. The silent witness was awake, alert, and ready to reveal everything. And when she did, No one, no manipulator, no liar, no orchestrator, would be able to escape the full consequences of their actions.